In the name of Allah. Hi everyone. Tonight I have the opportunity to talk to Dr. Kوالیک about FATF, its challenges, its disadvantages and advantages also. Dr. Kوالیک is a former professor at the University of Pittsburgh. He is also an American lawyer and a prolific author also. Dr. Kوالیک, so nice to have you with us tonight, and I really appreciate you for dedicating your time to us again.
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's go straight to the topic. As you may know, the topic of FATF, that is advantages of joining FATF. The advantages of joining FATF has been among the hottest headlines in Iran during the past weeks. So as a law professor and as an American lawyer, I want to know your opinion, first of all, about FATF, what it is in fact, and how does it work and why it was founded.
Well, it's an international organization ostensibly designed to govern international financial transactions to prevent money laundering, specifically to prevent monies from being used in the interest of selling illicit drugs, in the interest of terrorism. And so, again, it's to govern the financial system, again, ostensibly. I say ostensibly because I'm not sure that's exactly what it does, but to keep the monetary system, the financial system clean of those things, of terrorism, drugs, etc. But if I can just go on, I mean, in terms of my, critique of it.
Yeah.
Why I say ostensibly because, first of all, I read an interesting Guardian piece from the London Guardian a few years ago, and they said that 50%, so half of all money in world banks is laundered drug money, okay? And that basically if you took out all the laundered drug money out of the banks, the whole financial system would collapse. So obviously, if one of the goals of this organization is to keep drug money out of the financial system, it's doing a terrible job. Now that makes you wonder, is that really its purpose? I mean, the other issue, of course, is how do you define terrorism, right?
Exactly.
I mean, they're trying to prevent terrorists from being able to get money, give money in return for guns or whatever, right? But of course, a number of the member states, especially the United States of America, is the biggest purveyor of terrorism in the world. They just, claim other countries that they don't like Cuba, are state sponsors of terrorism, even though Cuba does nothing to promote terrorism. And in fact, there's a famous case of the Cuba Five, where these 5 intelligence officers from Cuba were arrested in the United States because they were trying to help the U.S. prevent terrorism. They were punished for that. I'm very skeptical about what this organization does, what it's really about. What I think it's really about is trying to prevent countries and entities that the West doesn't like from being able to enjoy the fruits of the financial system.
Exactly.
Anyway,
Sir.
Yeah.
Exactly. You mentioned the point that I really like to mention. The definition of terrorism is very important. Unfortunately, today, the definition of terrorism is under the structural and the media framework of the Western, school of thought. So obviously, the countries like Iran would definitely fall under the category of the state sponsors of terrorism. But Zionists and the Zionist regime who have been killing innocent civilians have never been under this category. This was exactly my question, that how does it affect Iran's supportive Hezbollah and axis of resistance, especially after the collapse of Assad in Syria? We have had a very difficult situation in supporting Hezbollah, especially we have lost our ground path to help the innocent Palestinians and also Lebanese. How does it affect?
Yeah, well, of course, this organization would try to ban any transactions to support Hezbollah, to support Yemen, to support Hamas, right? Because all those entities are considered terrorists by the West, and of course, when the opposite is true, right? I mean, especially when you look at Hezbollah, I mean, in my own view, they're the most ethical fighting force in the world. They're far from being terrorists. In fact, they oppose terrorism. They did, you mentioned Syria. They actually did a lot of work in Syria to fight terrorism, as did Iran. I would say there needs to be a counter organization to this, because, again, the way they define terrorism, it's its opposite. You mentioned Israel. I mean, Israel is never sanctioned for terrorism, even though what they're doing in Gaza is terrorism. I mean, it's even worse than that. It's genocide. It's Holocaustal, and yet they're not being punished at all. And the U.S., of course, is supporting that. And, of course, the U.S. has supported terrorism around the world. It supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. It supported Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria and Iraq, and supported terrorists in Libya to overthrow Gaddafi. I mean, you can go on and on. There's a great article by Seymour Hersh, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, about that. I mean, how going back to like 2005 or so, where the U.S., instead of fighting Al-Qaeda, began to support it, to overthrow governments like Syria. So how do you trust an organization that's led by countries like the United States to govern terrorism? You can't. It's asking the fox to guard the hen house, right? It doesn't make any sense. So
Exactly true. I know, Doctor, that you have written many books. One of the books that you have written is called The U.S. Plot to Control the World. And you have another book called The U.S. Plot to Attack Iran. I want to know your opinion as an expert. Is there even a relationship between the FATF and the foundations like FATF and the plot of the United States to control the world?
Yes, of course. Of course, the FATF is part of the West's, the collective West attempt to control the world, to again punish countries it doesn't like by designating them as terrorists, preventing them from using the financial system to even buy food or buy medicine, and drive those countries into the ground, possibly to create regime change. I think Syria is a great example of that, where they were punished by these crippling economic sanctions for years, including the Caesar Act, which Trump put into effect. They were denied the ability to have any functioning economy, to reconstruct after the war. And we see the results of it. I mean, their military just collapsed in the face of these Al-Qaeda forces, which had taken over due to years of these economic sanctions. And again, this is what organizations like FATF are designed for, to give control of the West, so that they can benefit from the world financial system, and those that they don't like can't. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I see. You know, there are many arguments in Iran regarding joining FATF. some politicians and journalists in Iran claim that the only way to get a prosperous economy and to have a tangible economic growth, and in order to absorb foreign investment, the only way is to join in FATF. The others believe that by joining FATF we would complete the puzzle of sanctions, and the Americans would be able to impose more precise and more smart sanctions on Iran, as they call it. What do you think? Is there any relationship between joining a FATF and economic growth, in fact?
Well, perhaps. I mean, my guess is if Iran, first of all, was allowed to join it, I can't envision a scenario where at present they'd even be allowed to join it because they're considered a state sponsor of terrorism, right? So it doesn't make any sense. They would have to, again, eschew all designs on supporting the resistance to be able to join. They'd have to give up all of their principles to be able to join, first of all. If they were allowed to join, yeah, I suppose they'd be rewarded in some way. I mean, again, it would be such a radical thing. They'd have to do so many radical changes in terms of their whole ideology and their whole foreign policy to join it, that, yeah, I guess at that point they'd be readmitted to the West. And yeah, I suppose they'd have an ability to get the benefits from that, you know.
The problem is that, as far as I know, and to the best of my knowledge, we already have implemented the majority of the provisions of FATF. I think we have implemented an action plan of FATF, but we didn't see any significant signs and tangible signs of economic growth. And not only it did not have any positive effects, but also in some cases it had negative effects. So what do you think about it?
No, that makes sense to me. And again, the problem is that it requires to join that organization would require such a bowing of Iran to Western foreign policy designs that what would be left of Iran at that point? I mean, it would basically have to go back to the days of the Shah in terms of its world outlook. I mean, which of course is what the West wants, right? That's what it wants for Iran. And not just the FATF. Look at the nuclear deal that Iran signed on to. They abided by the nuclear deal. They never got the full benefit of it, right? Because Obama never fully relinquished sanctions against Iran. And then Trump just ripped up the deal unilaterally and then imposed even more sanctions on Iran. So this is what the West does. I mean, how do you deal with the West under those circumstances? And Russia found out the same thing. You know, they tried to deal with the West. They agreed to the Minsk agreements, which the Security Council unanimously approved, including the United States. And the West never abided by the Minsk agreements. And that's what led to the war in the Ukraine. You know, so I understand why there'd be people in Iran that want to join an organization like this, because, yeah, these sanctions and the isolation that Iran is suffering is very difficult for the people there. And I don't want to underplay that, but I'm not sure this is the solution to that. You know, I think the real solution is what we're seeing with the BRICS, that the real solution, again, if Iran wants to continue its revolution of 1979, is to deal with other countries outside the West, with Russia, China, India, South Africa, which that's a huge market. We're talking about a huge market, and we're talking about a huge other economic world out there.
Yeah, exactly. My point is that the situation cannot even get worse, because Iran is already the second heavily sanctioned country in the world after Russia. And until a few years ago, before the war of Ukraine, Iran was the first heavily sanctioned country in the world. So I think joining FATF, please correct me if I'm mistaken, joining FATF cannot solve all of our problems, because even if we join FATF, there are already very serious sanctions of the United States, like CAATSA, like ISA, Iran Sanction Act, and like, many serious sanctions of the United Nations. So it cannot solve any problem, I think, because the fundamental problems are always still there. And you said that if you can solve all those problems, you have to return to the time of Shah. And that's exactly the point. So if we were supposed to do all the, as you said, to bow to the American imperialism, so why did even we had any revolutions? So why did we sacrifice thousands of lives to make the revolution a victory?
Yeah, well, many Syrians are asking that very question right now. And, but this is the difficulty that revolutions are put in. Anti-imperialist revolutions are put in the current world. I mean, that there's a lot of sacrifice that has to be made to maintain the revolution. Again, look at Cuba right now. They're in a lot of very difficult financial situation because because of their steadfastness with their revolution. Venezuela the same. Nicaragua's starting to experience that as well. But what's the alternative? Again, what we see when we look at a Libya or we look at a Syria, for example, their revolutions were overthrown at the time they were trying to deal with the West, not at a time when they were most revolutionary, right?
Exactly.
Gaddafi was overthrown when he was trying to deal with the West. And he, explicitly said he'd give up any designs on nuclear weapons. He was even trying, his son, Saif, was working with the International Democratic Institute to create a Western-style constitution for Libya. They were doing everything the West wanted. They paid out compensation to the Lockerbie, Scotland plane disaster, even though they continued to claim they had nothing to do with it. And there's even pictures of Saif, or one of the Gaddafi sons, with Hillary Clinton, not long before Gaddafi was overthrown. So they overthrew Libya when they were most playing ball with the West. Similarly with Syria, Assad was starting to at least try to work with the Gulf states, trying to do a lot of things they were asking him to do, including cutting off some support for Hezbollah. He was trying to get readmitted back into the West, again, at the time he was overthrown. There's some lessons to be drawn from this, right? I mean, you can compromise and compromise and compromise, and you're still not going to be rewarded for it. And that has to be a lesson from recent events, I think.
Yeah, exactly true. And the point you just mentioned, it might be not very related to FATF, but very interesting for me. You named Cuba and Nicaragua. These are the two countries that have been under serious pressure from the United States, but they are not Islamic. So, because some Iranians believe that all the problems of the United States with us is because we are an Islamic nation. They believe if we stop being an Islamic regime, as they call, all the problems will be solved. But we have the examples of Cuba and other Latin American countries. And also we have Russia and other examples who are not Muslims, but they are not willing to bow to the United States imperialism.
Well, yes. And of course, look at other Islamic states that the U.S. does support, like Saudi Arabia. Or look at Syria. The U.S. overthrew a secular state and has replaced it with religious fanatics that want to set up a country based on Sharia law.
Exactly.
So, I mean, you know, it's not about whether you're Islamic or not Islamic. What it's about is, are you subservient to the West and to Western capitalism? That's all that matters. It doesn't matter if you're democratic. Of course, Saudi Arabia is a monarchy. If you look at what's happening in Syria, the new leader, Jalani, has said there won't be elections for 4 years. Okay, so he's made it clear he's not interested in democracy. It doesn't matter, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean,
very much.
that's the reality. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will not take your time any longer, and that was very valuable for us to have your opinion as an American lawyer about FATF and about other international issues. And I once again thank you very much, and have a good time. If you have any other points to add, we are willing to hear.
Thank you, my friend. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. See you later.
Okay. Bye-bye.